Hi, I'm Veronica. Welcome to my channel where I teach you various somatic techniques to deal with the effects of chronic stress. That includes the chronic tension and various compensation patterns that develop in your body. I would like to show you how you can use something as simple and well known as a cat-cow position to really understand your patterns of overdoing or not doing enough, and also to get the most of the full mobility of the spine. So let's begin by getting into all fours. And just as a quick note, you might be one of the people who avoid staying in this tabletop or all four position because of the wrists or because of the knees. Now, I would really encourage you to try to approach this position and maybe do it for a shorter period of time and just play with it so that you give your tissues a chance to strengthen, because the more you're going to avoid loading your joints, the worse they will eventually be. And what happens quite often with this position is that the problem isn't really with the wrists or with the knees, but with your contact with the ground and how much you collapse into your joints as a habitual pattern. So to begin with, you can find a place where your hands and when your knees want to land. So don't worry about any alignment like where your index finger should be or anything like this. It's okay if your fingers want to point out. And this is not going to make that much of a difference. What matters far more is how you're distributing the weight over those four limbs. So I'll give you an example. If you habitually collapse, what would happen in this position is that your whole weight would sink into the wrists. You might see what happens now with my fingers. They kind of barely touch the ground anymore. It's all heavily in the wrists, and as that posture kind of collapsing posture travels upwards, there is also a collapse in that space between the shoulder blades. The head might be hanging, or sometimes just the opposite, you might be pushing it all the way up. And if that collapsed position, if you look at it at the back, it's the same, like the front of the feet kind of barely touch the ground. It's all in the knees, and there's also that big dip in the lower back. So probably you might have heard in some classes, whether you do yoga or it's maybe Pilates or some other exercise form, that to prevent that collapse is to be really strong and engage everything. So it feels like spreading the fingers wide and press down, push down with your palms into the ground, and push down with your legs into the ground, and then kind of suck in the belly so that there is no dip in the to prevent that dip in the lower back. You will might hear to sink the waist or to suck in the belly, right? So all of this will make you actually really tired after a very short time. There's lots of engagement and lots of tension in your body that you actually don't need. So there's something in between of these two extremes, and that is what in somatics is called yielding. Getting the support of the earth without sinking with all the weight into the joints. And imagining that there is some line of communication between the top of the head and the tail. So maybe as if something was gently tugging at both ends, so that none of the parts in between drops. But you don't really need to suck the belly in or engage the pelvic floor to do that. Like, you can be still quite soft. Your legs might be still quite soft. Your belly might be still quite soft. And you might still be in that quite stable position and actually stay here for quite a while without feeling that strain in the wrists nor in the knees. So that's the first thing you can work with. And of course, you need a little break. And one way out is to sit back, if we're talking about the wrist. The other one would be to walk your hands and always just change the angle where the fingers are pointing, or shift the weight between one hand and the other. And that is also a good way to check your patterns of which where you tend to lean. So you might notice that you're kind of always leaning more towards one leg or one arm, and this is because maybe you're trying to protect, even subconsciously, that other arm or leg, especially if you had some injury there in the past and there is still that idea that, oh, I should be careful about it. Maybe I shouldn't put all of my weight there. So those are all the things to consider. And once you find your comfortable tabletop, then you can start moving the spine. There are so many ways you can do it. So you could begin with going segment by segment and really isolate each part at a time. Starting, let's say, from the tail. So it would look like a teeny tiny movement just in your tailbone. Your tail going a little bit down and your tail going a little bit up. And see if you can really make it only palpable in that very last section of the spine, so that it doesn't yet involve your lower back. As you can see, like, I'm not moving it yet. I'm moving my tailbone, but there is no response in the lower back yet. Only if I move farther through the sacrum towards the lumbar, that's where the pelvis starts moving together with the lower back. And this is the movement where you might get into that familiar sinking all the way down, getting to the point where it's the easiest for the spine to bend. Something that sometimes is called the hinge, that one place where there is a little bit more space for that bend. So be careful about that pattern and see if you can invite all the neighboring vertebrae to join in that movement as well, rather than moving in kind of segments and always bending at just one spot. So if you want this movement to travel, let's say we go just one direction first. So let's say we want to put the tail down, and then there will be a rounding. And the rounding in the lower back is something that we rarely do. And this is often the reason why there is so much stiffness and maybe even pain there. So invite that space. You might even kind of breathe into that area in the lower back. So nothing happens yet higher. What usually will round when you do the classic kind of cat-cow is that there's this massive rounding in the upper back, but not much is happening in the lower back. So now you have time to focus just on that space. Breathe to it, open it, And you can imagine as if somebody was placing finger at each of the vertebrae, and that's how you're opening gradually, one by one, eventually getting to that space that feels much easier to reach. That is that space between the shoulder blades, but maybe you can see that this is now a little bit more even than what I was just showing before if you begin from the space between the shoulder blades, because you don't need to go to the maximum here. It's enough that you feel that, yes, this part is moving now as well. And the end of this movement means that the head can drop, because it is really like an arch of a rainbow. Your tail points down. That means that your head is also pointing down. Now, if you wanted to reverse it, you start with the tail that lifts, and then comes that deep in the lower back. And remember, not where you usually bend just at one point, but see if you can really go one vertebra at a time to make all of them involved, but roughly evenly. And then there will be this kind of sticky place somewhere around the mid-back that doesn't really want to move too much. So try to invite that one to go down before you reach the area between the shoulder blades, and at the end of this movement, your head lifts as well. Okay. So this is one way of doing it. And of course, you can take a break, you can sit back, you can move your wrists, and do anything else you need to give it a little break. You could also reverse that order and start from the head and end with the tail. And that would be something like dropping the head first, and then allowing that space between the shoulder blades to rise and expand, and the shoulder blades to spread apart. And then that's gonna get you to the middle back. You can imagine that I'm placing my finger at each of the vertebrae as you make your way farther down, and try to create that more space and rounding in the lower back until eventually your tail starts pointing down. And then you might start with lifting the head, and that movement travels through the neck, through the space between the shoulder blades, and then down towards your lower back, and eventually the tail lifts. And you want to find in somewhere where it feels neutral. Okay. So you might have come across this one. It's really trying to get each of your vertebrae working, and you might treat it more like a little test, and maybe film yourself, and then or watch yourself with a mirror, so that you see whether these parts are really moving, or they tend to go like in whole chunks, in like big segments, as if some parts of the spine were kind of fused together. And there are some little tricks you can do to wake up particular parts of the spine. So if you want to work more on that area of the lower back and rounding that area, it works quite well to spend some time in the child's pose. Have your hand on that lower back and breathe into the hand. Work on expanding it every time you inhale. And if you want to work on that space between the shoulder blades, you could work on lowering and lifting only this section, letting it sink. As you can see, I'm not bending my elbows, it's just that space between the shoulder blades that sinks. And then you can imagine you want to lift something heavy that you have between the shoulder blades, and that reaches up towards the sky, but you don't do it anywhere else in the spine. It's again kind of isolated movement. And this isolation is useful for you to start feeling again the parts of the body that kind of got all lumped together as an effect of various compensation patterns. But it's also very important that you feel your spine as a whole and that you want it to work in synchrony. So this is a very different approach to all fours. And here, visualization works really nicely. So once you reestablish your contact with the ground where you don't sink nor push away, you can imagine now the middle of the spine, wherever that is for you, and that somebody attached a hook to the middle of it. Right in the middle of it, there is a hook, and then someone pulls by that hook, and that creates that very evenly distributed arch. So that middle part lifts, and then everything that is above and below it will slowly start arching downwards with your tail and your head at the very end of this movement. And then you can imagine something opposite, that there is a hook attached to the space, maybe at the bottom of your ribs or the bottom of your sternum, and somebody starts pulling by that. And then this movement travels really evenly until something like a big smile shows in your spine. So again, the head and the tail lift simultaneously at the end of this movement that sequences through your body. So you could try that a couple of times. And a quick note about the breathing: you don't really need to set it up as breathing in one particular shape or breathing out in the other. This might be taking you a good couple of breaths to go in between of these two shapes, maybe having a little rest in a neutral position and going to that second option. So I would first really recommend you to go very, very slowly. And maybe once you start getting hold of it and you really feel that this movement truly sequences through all of you from the middle outwards, then you could make it a little bit more to the breath. And not necessarily the way you're used to, that you're inhaling when the spine is arched downwards and exhaling when the spine is arched upwards, as you often hear in the yoga classes. You can easily test how it would be to inhale when you inhale to the back of the lungs. So that the inhalation would be the expansion in either direction, and exhalation would be returning to the neutral. And just check what it does to you. So try various versions. There is no point to stick to one way of doing of that. But I would definitely, what I would discourage is this kind of approach of sucking the belly in and pushing away from the ground to create the shape. Like you don't really, it's a lot of things happening in your arms, maybe in your belly, but it doesn't have the same effect for the spine when you move from the spine. So basically, I invite you to move from the spine. Move the spine from the spine, not from the arms, not from the core. Okay? So I hope that you enjoyed that. And of course, it's not going to happen overnight. So keep on going with this one. Keep trying it out. Also, always checking whether you start thinking or whether you get into that familiar pattern of getting a bit too muscular about it. And yeah, let me know how it went. I hope it was useful. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. I share one video every Monday morning. Have a lovely day.